one of these. Just popping it in the chat box. A data storyteller. It's a real job, and the job description is described as to share how data is transforming the world through video, use news, current events, and create stories to create short, entertaining online videos. I think that's a pretty resounding no. Oh, and a yes, maybe. Okay. Did any of you at 8 years old want to do this job? A happiness manager. Again, real job. And the description is to manage a budget and collaborate on fiscal strategy, corporate customer account management for tech startups, like some examples of tech startups. A couple of yeses there. I suspect you might be lying. Okay. And the last example's a job you might have wanted to do when you were 8 years old. Time ninja. And again, real job. The description is, this position is responsible for providing support analysis on issues, reports, and trends from the time and attendance tools. Okay, so these are 3 real jobs. And as somebody quite rightly pointed out in the chat box just now, these jobs didn't exist when we were 8 years old. Certainly not when I was 8 years old, anyway. Okay, the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of the jobs, and in fact, one popular estimate from the World Economic Forum suggests that 65% of children today will end up doing jobs in the future that don't exist now. So how can we prepare students for the future? Well, this is where future skills come in. And by future skills, what we mean is jobs that skills that are going to be relevant for all jobs, and also academic study in the future. So what are these? Any ideas? If you like to pop them in the chat box again. Excuse my tea. Flexible, 4 C's, yeah, virtual design, collaboration, creative, space station manager, brilliant. Technical, anything digital, empathy, internet traffic controller. Okay, brilliant. Well, yeah, it seems you're quite knowledgeable about all of these already. So when you research future skills, or when I was doing research for future skills anyway for this talk, there are lots of different types of skills that come up, but I managed to find about 5 which came up more often than not. And thank you, it's very nice, Margaret. I am indeed the best mum ever. So the 5 future skills that came up here, that come up quite often, are complex problem solving, creativity, collaboration, cognitive flexibility, and emotional intelligence. So what do we mean by these? Well, let's look at each one in turn. So first is complex problem solving. And this is the ability to solve new complex problems in real world settings. So being able to solve problems is obviously a very important skill in the world of work and academic study. And as you say, they're important today too. The point is, these aren't problems, we don't mean problems that we come across every day. We mean new problems, things that we haven't faced before. And this is perhaps particularly relevant at the moment with all of us having to solve the problem of teaching online. So quick question there about get the slides for this presentation. As I said, the recording of this webinar with these slides shown in it will be available. You'll get an email with a link to it. Okay, so a big part of complex problem solving is first actually defining what the actual problem is. And part of that is assessing what is and isn't important, what we need to actually solve, and what is part of a problem, and what is peripheral. And this also involves looking at problems from new vantage points. So trying to look at things from a different perspective, different perspectives, different effects of the problem, which then helps us look at different approaches to solving problems. It also involves breaking problems up into manageable parts to make them less daunting and easier to find solutions to. And by looking at the complex problems in smaller, more manageable parts, we can then try out solutions through trial and error. And of course, trial and error is an important skill. By trying things out and being able to honestly reflect on them, and say what was successful and what wasn't. Now, all of these we try and develop and work on in Roadmap, and we'll look in a short while at exactly how we do that. Empathy is coming up as well, though. Okay, so by solving complex problems, this involves us developing and selecting new ways of trying to solve them, with realistic solutions. And this brings us and ties in very closely, I think, to the next future skill, which is that of creativity. Now, creativity as a future skill isn't just a part of the more traditionally creative jobs like writing or artistic kind of careers. It's going to be important in everything, especially when it comes to new ways to solve problems. And this is especially important in today's world, where we're kind of bombarded with lots of information and quick fixes, quick solutions. So it's being able to kind of think on your own 2 feet in order to come up with solutions. And obviously a big part of the future work world is going to be automation. A lot of people will find jobs being automated, but this is one area where we really separate ourselves from automation as humans. And these are therefore going to be the important skills. Now, having creativity, again, it isn't just having new ideas. Imagination is about having new ideas. Creativity as a future skill involves having new ideas and acting on them, and seeing them through in practice. It involves taking risks and experimenting, asking exploratory questions, so asking questions to find out more information that we need in order to come up with solutions. And also it involves seeing learning as fun, constantly trying to develop our skills. And these last 3, I think, are particularly relevant and are likely to kind of ring a few bells for us as language teachers. I mean, this is what good language learners do. They take risks, they experiment with new types of language. They ask questions to find out about rules behind different things. And obviously they see learning as fun in order to stay motivated. And again, it's the same for us as language teachers as well. We take risks, we experiment with new materials, new ideas, new ways of teaching through technology. We ask questions to find out about our students, to find out about ways of teaching. And I would hope we often see it as fun as well. So, having looked at these first 2, the complex problem solving and closely linked to it, creativity, I'll just give you a quick nod towards the closing plenary on Friday by Dr. Ken Beattie. It's on Friday at 2 p.m. and it's going to be looking at ways of dealing with new situations in teaching. It's likely to be good, so I'd recommend registering. Okay, the next future skill that we highlighted was collaboration. And I think this is something that is very familiar to us as language teachers, and that we try to organise as much as we can in language lessons. So there's several elements to this. There's understanding how a team works and what people's roles are. And this in turn involves social and cultural awareness, which again is something it's a very common theme in language teaching, looking at different cultures, different ways of behaving socially. Now, of course, it's important to understand what people's roles are so that we can have clear goals as well. So each person has their own clear role and goal, and how this works together as a team as well. Another big part of this is being able to build solid relationships, even in difficult circumstances. And again, this is something that's quite relevant now with teaching online, because we are all facing difficult circumstances. It involves equal participation, so avoiding one person dominating too much, making sure weak students feel comfortable enough to participate, making sure they have something to say. And this is where personalisation can come into the fray as well, because it gives people something to say. And when people are sharing things about themselves through personalisation, this can really help build a group rapport, group dynamic as well. Another aspect of collaboration is, again, it's how we're doing it now online. Virtual brainstorming is something that often comes up when you really read about collaboration as a future skill. And online is good for this because it is somewhat of a leveler, and that's what you want when you're collaborating by brainstorming ideas. You want everyone to kind of feel free to participate. So moving on to our next future skill, this is cognitive flexibility. This does kind of speak for itself. Cognitive as in engaging your brain, and flexibility as in being flexible, obviously. So this involves things like quickly shifting your thinking from one concept to another. And related to that is multitasking. Now, whether you think multitasking is a good thing or not, it is a very important skill in the world of work and of academic study as well. In terms of academic study, you have to draw things from different sources. And in work as well as academic study, you often find that you're having to deal with several different issues and problems at the same time. Quick question from Emma: collaboration just like cooperation in this context? Yeah, pretty much. Although I think cooperation also ties into emotional intelligence as well. We'll have a look at that in a second. Yes, so multitasking, being able to switch from one thing to another thing, or working on something, but having the ideas for something else kind of brewing at the back of your mind as well. Seeking new experiences, again, this is being constantly on the move. That's a nice way of saying it as well, yeah. So seeking new experience, not just relying on the tried and tested ways that we know how to do things. And again, as teachers, this is something we have to do as well. It's a good example of it. We have to try out new ideas. We have to develop, especially when every one of our students is so different. So it's about not taking the easy way. It's about reading more, finding out about new ideas, learning from your peers, whether you're a student learning words or things from other students, or whether you're a teacher, sharing and picking up ideas in the staff room. Yeah, not always on the run like that. Open-minded, to be curious. Yeah. Oh, excellent. Yeah, all of those. It's also about challenging your own beliefs. You may have done something in the classroom which pretty much always works well, but then you have a new class and it doesn't work well. So it's about going back to that, reflecting on it, and looking at how you might need to adapt it as people progress. Taking risks, it's another good idea. Getting out of the comfort zone, good. And being flexible, being open to new ideas. A lot of the comments that you're saying here. Okay, so just to kind of think about how this applies to us at the moment, if you could just put yes or no in the chat box, have you been teaching online recently? Pretty much a resounding yes. A couple of no's and not yet's there, but mainly yes. Okay, if you've been teaching online recently, could you type in the chat box one thing that you've changed about how you teach? Or it could be something that you find you're focusing on more, something like that. Everything. Interaction. More visual support, yeah. Double work, oh, that sounds good. Activities. Lecturing, more attention. Okay, there's lots of excellent ideas there. Fantastic. For me, multitasking definitely. Okay, I have to move on. Sorry. For me, I think there are three things which kind of stick out that I'm doing differently. When I was face-to-face teaching, I did very few whole class discussions, especially in larger classes. I tended to prefer doing more pair work and group work, because I found that students could interact more and there'd be more kind of equal participation. However, I find online I'm doing quite a bit more whole class discussion, because it's almost like we kind of have this kind of group rapport, especially when you use something like Zoom, and you can see people kind of coming up as they speak. Something that a few of you have mentioned here as well, I find I'm using visuals a lot more. For two reasons, partly because they're so readily available. I've got a web browser, I can just pull across a picture at any time. But also it's easier to display them, I think. You don't need to first set it up on an interactive whiteboard or projector, whatever. The other thing that I found that I've been doing a bit differently as well is, you know how when you start with a new class, you often start by, especially lower level, you start by teaching some classroom language, things like listen, repeat, work in pairs, compare, that kind of thing. I found that I've been incorporating a fair bit of tech language into that. Things like turn it up, down microphone, mute, unmute, things like that. So they're differences that I've made. But it sounds like you've all been doing similar and other things as well. So great to see the flexibility there. So moving on to our last future skill here. Emotional intelligence. Now there is some debate as to whether emotional intelligence is actually a thing or whether it's kind of a combination of other types of Gardner's intelligence, but I'm going to stick with using it here as a kind of label, because it's used quite a lot. So this involves things like managing your own feelings, keeping a level head and a positive outlook, especially in the situation we're all in at the moment. Something I started doing in my classes is having 5 minutes at the start, a little section called Reasons to be Cheerful. And in this section, one or two or even all students share something positive that's happened to them since the last lesson. So it could be things like they baked a nice cake, or they saw a great TV program or something, or they finally got round to fixing that wonky chair in the kitchen, something like that. So yeah, that's something that's kind of exploiting the situation. Empathy as well, someone mentioned earlier, is a big part of this. And this is particularly important when we do things like use personalization. sharing our own ideas, that kind of thing, responding to other people's ideas. Motivation is a big part here, not just in motivating students, but also helping students reflect on and discover what motivates them. So that, again, we're kind of developing this ability for them to motivate themselves by becoming self-aware, which is the next point there. And the last point there is people skills. This is kind of the culmination of all these points here. So this is in terms of building rapport. We'll have a look at an example of how we do that in Roadmap. It's a quick question there. Damien, are these 5 skills inspired by someone, or is it your own list? It's an amalgamation of lots of different websites. If you Google future skills, I think a lot of this came basis from the World Economic Forum, but there's kind of other little bits that I've added in as well. Something that I found quite fun is in terms of developing and looking at emotional intelligence when online teaching is the inevitable mishaps that happen. For me, the biggest mishap that often happens is my dog walks in. And if it's anywhere near her feeding time, she starts whining, and she can whine quite loudly as well. So that often becomes a mishap. Have any of you had any mishaps that you'd like to share? Parrot. My mum asks me things, car, connectivity, Amazon deliveries. Child came in screaming. Cat trying to touch people's faces. Oh, son going into the kitchen with underwear. Brilliant. But I think these little kind of mishaps, or real life as really kind of helps with this rapport building and emotional intelligence, because it happens to all of us. We're all living real lives, and we're all in this situation, really. So it's a good opportunity to exploit these things as well. Someone asked where my dog is. I'm pretty sure she's downstairs having one of her many naps of the day. She's quite old, bless her. Okay, so moving on. How does Roadmap develop these future skills? Well, before we look at each skill in turn, nephew invited my husband's story. Oh, this is brilliant. Okay, thanks for sharing those. Okay, so this is basically the structure of Roadmap, our new English course. And if you want to find out more information about it, I'm just going to pop a little link in the chat box here. If you go to english.com/roadmap, you'll find lots more information about it. Has anyone used it at all? Yeah, I had a chance to. Yes, quite a few no's there, a couple of yeses. Okay, well, I hope you will soon. It's quite a new course. So basically, this is a basic structure. It's a 2-tiered approach. So you have we call the fast track route, which is what you're probably more familiar with in a traditional course book. So within this fast track route, we have 10 units, and within each unit there are 4 main lessons. The first 3 of these, A, B and C, all lead towards a communicative speaking goal. And what we did when we were writing it is we would start with a speaking goal. What do we want students to be able to do by the end of the lesson? So it could be things like describe how to cook a dish. It could be plan an event, choose choose where to go on a trip, or like here, describe a successful person, plan a new lifestyle, something like that. Then what we did, starting from this final speaking goal, we then looked at what grammar, vocabulary and pronunciation work students needed in order to achieve that goal. And they also listen to a model, someone doing it, or they read about information related to it as well. The D lesson is what we call English in action. And for the D lesson, the focus is on functional language. So again, it starts with this goal, but it's probably something more functional, like shopping, or I don't know, having a video conference call, dealing with problems with it, something like that. And then finally, each unit finishes with a check and reflect, where they have some review work and reflect on what they can do. Now, the main fast track route has as its main goal speaking for every lesson. However, there is some practice of reading, listening, writing as well. What we do include, however, is the extended route. So linked to each of these first 3 lessons in each unit, we have something that's related by topic, but we work on developing a specific sub-skill. So for example, 1A, you can either go on to 1B, or you can do the extra work on listening. And here what we do is we aim not just to practice a skill, but actually to teach it. So we put a little focus box in it, and then we teach a strategy to help with it. So for example, for understanding the main idea in 1A here, they look at sentence stress, which words are usually stressed in a sentence, as a way of helping them develop their listening skills. And it's a different sub-skill for each one. So you can either do the course with the fast track route, or you can do the whole thing, developing skills at the same time, or you can chop and change bits. So that's how we kind of develop language skills. But how do we develop future skills? Okay, so if we come back to complex problem solving, remember the ability to solve new complex problems in real world settings, looking at different vantage points, breaking up the problem and using trial and error to solve it. So this is the start of one of the lessons. What topic do you think the lesson is about? Diana had it straight away, I think, school uniforms. So this is a develop your writing lesson. And here we're looking at helping them develop their essay writing skills for for and against essays. So they start with some introduction, and then we give them some examples of arguments for and against. They read and decide if it's for or against. So here they're trying to look at the issue from different vantage points. They then decide if they agree or disagree with each one. Then comes the focus box, and this is where we teach them a strategy. So here we're teaching them how to develop an argument in an essay. And we say, in an essay, you can build your own argument by undermining an opposing argument. You do this by saying that the opposing argument is just a theory or an idea, but the truth is different. And then we give them some common phrases. In principle, but in practice. Theoretically, but in reality. And so on, and so on. This is B1 level. And then it comes to the actual problem solving part, i.e. they actually write the essay. So they choose a topic first, make a list of arguments for and against a statement. So here they're bringing in the different vantage points and the creativity side as well. Then they decide whether they're going to argue for or against and plan it. Then comes the trial and error part at the end. They write a first draft, read each other's drafts in pairs and make suggestions, give feedback and then write a second draft. So that will be the next trial part. Okay, so moving on to creativity. Now, as I said, in the main route, the fast track route of the book, every lesson ends up with a speaking goal. It's both the starting point and the finishing point, if you get what I mean. And each final speaking activity is split further into a prepare stage and a speak stage, and then there's some reflection at the end. So in the prepare stage, they often listen to a model of someone doing the task, and this task is how to give advice about rules and customs for a visitor to the student's country. So they listen to the model, do a comprehension task, then they prepare their own advice. So they can choose 4 topics, they can come up with other topics. The idea is to encourage creativity here. Then they select these down and think of questions that they can ask other people, and then they've had their ideas and now they put them into practice by taking turns giving them advice. We give them some more useful phrases, more tools for the task, and then a bit of reflection where they reflect on the most useful advice they heard. Okay, so collaboration is the next part. And this is from, let me just check, I think, yeah, this is another main speaking lesson in the book. And it's all about first days at work or school. So here they start by reading a text. There's another paragraph as well, but I just put these in to give an example. They ask people about their first days at work and what happened. And they've got a couple of responses here that they read as kind of input. Next, they work on the grammar, the vocabulary and everything they need for the task. And then again comes the final speaking task. So the task is they give an induction talk to new staff if they're working, or new students if they're studying. So they collaborate in pairs first to discuss which topics they'll include. Then they go away and work individually and prepare their talk. Useful phrases again to help them. We give them extra useful phrases with every task. And then finally they collaborate in groups, taking turns giving their talks. And here, by having them give talks in groups individually, we can ensure equal participation. And they use their questions to ask the speaker questions as well. Is roadmap intended for adult learners or teenagers? It's intended for adults, so from 18 up. But a lot of the topics, I would imagine, are useful for older teenagers as well. Sorry, I'm just reading this question about conditionals. I can't possibly get students to use correctly all conditionals or take about conditionals. It's a good question. I mean, I think if you want them to use them correctly, then that's giving them lots of examples of correct use is a good idea. But I think what you also got to think, and what we thought when we were writing roadmap is, do you want that to be your end goal? Do we want students to be able to use conditionals correctly, or do we want them to be able to achieve the thing that they're going to use conditionals for? So, for example, one of the lessons in roadmap where people, I think it's from A2 plus level, and we do some work on conditionals, but the end goal of the lesson is we want them to give advice about how to save money. So it's things like, if you spend it on this, it will, and so on and so on. So conditionals are great if they're going to help them do that, if they're going to help them what they do in real life. But when they're using English in real life and they want to achieve things, get things done, if they're not using conditionals 100% correctly, but they're achieving what they want to achieve, then I would say that's more important than having perfectly grammatically correct languages. Because remember, native speakers don't always use grammar correctly as well. You'll hear things like should have and that. Anyway, I hope that answers your question partly. Yeah, breakout rooms as well, useful. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna continue and come back to these at the end. Okay, so in terms of cognitive flexibility, one thing that we discovered before we started writing Roadmap, we carried out extensive research into what teachers and what students want. And one of the things that came up was this idea of topic fatigue. Now, you often find in perhaps more traditional course books, you'll have a module or a unit, and within that you'll have lessons, and they're all kind of linked by the same topic. And that's something we've tried to avoid in Roadmap, so that basically you're coming up with a different topic every lesson. There might be some vague links, and certainly in terms of building on language from previous lessons. So here we have verb patterns 1, verb patterns 2, noun patterns 2. There are some links that way. But what we try to do is make the topics new and interesting for each lesson. So if you look here, for example, Unit 7, we've got a lesson on health problems, discussing health problem, money issues, then something related to travel, then dealing with problems in shops and services. And then Unit 8, we have environmental issues, relationships, important life events, and making phone calls. So there's quite a bit of variety, and this is also helpful, hopefully building in this idea of cognitive flexibility. They're being asked to carry out different tasks from lesson to lesson, and kind of switching between these things. And with the building of language in this way as well, it's helping them to map that in different contexts, as it were. Isn't that approach too much in terms of vocabulary? I don't think so. It's an interesting point you make there as well. I think it's a good question to ask, because I remember when I was training to teacher, I was always taught, don't overload students with vocabulary because they can only remember a set number of words. But I've always kind of thought, what's the harm in putting it out there? And if students can take away what they want to take away from it. I once worked in a school in London, and we carried out some really kind of simple, basic research. What we did was we took a morning class, and we asked all the teachers to write down what they taught that day, and we asked all the students to write down what they learnt that day. And there was one teacher who wrote down, I think it was the present perfect versus past simple is what he taught today. None of his students wrote that. The one thing they all wrote down was the word vacuum cleaner. So I think, you know, we can set out to teach whatever for students, but we can't always predict what they'll learn. So my kind of approach to vocabulary is give them as much as I can, and then help them take away what they can. Another good question, what's the best way of learning new vocabulary? How long have you got? I don't think there is perhaps one best way. There is another talk on this week with Rachel Roberts, which I highly recommend, and it's about learning vocabulary trees. I'm not sure when it is exactly, but if you check the schedule, recommended again. Okay, so we move on to our final future skill, if you like, emotional intelligence. So this is from a D lesson, English in Action, so a functional language lesson. Thanks, Svetlana, 14th of May. So looking at the photos at the start of the lesson, can you guess what the topic, what the communicative task is for this lesson? Okay, interviews, customs, arguments, patience. Okay, it's a bit of all that. Problems, solving disputes. Yes, exactly. It's got it just there. The letters are very small. So the aim of this lesson is to teach students how to negotiate solutions to disputes. So it's basically aiming helping them develop their ability to mediate, as it were, or be diplomatic within a dispute. So again, they listen to some examples and then pick out some functional language. So things like seeking compromise, expressing annoyance, apologizing, dealing with anger. And they listen to some talks and pick out some more phrases for those as well. And then all of this, they do some pronunciation work as well. And all of this leads towards the final task here, which is a role play. So they work in pairs and they have two separate roles. Student A's is you work with student B, who has been with the company much longer than you. You joined a few months ago. Student B has been there almost a decade. Student B doesn't like the way you work, even though you've been getting good results. You feel student B can be a bit bullying. You've been missing work to avoid a conflict with B, but have now decided you need to confront him or her. And then student B's instructions start with, you have been working for the same company for the last 10 years, and student A started a few months ago. You're a steady worker and like to stay on top of things, but student A leaves things to the last minute, and so on and so on and so on. And then basically they role play trying to resolve this conflict that student A brings up. They actually do it twice. There's another one, and in the other role play, they role play a tenant and a landlord having a conflict that they need to resolve as well. So those are some of the ways, in practical terms, that we help to develop. And I think develop is the key word there. Not just practice these future skills that students can then take away and use in work and academic study. I'm going to leave you with a little quote. This is from an American author, Robert Greene, and it is that the future belongs to those who learn more skills and combine them in creative ways. And that's really what we're trying to do throughout Roadmap, helping develop for students to learn more of these future skills and how to combine them and apply them to real life. So, to finish up, we'll come to question time. If you've got any more or missed questions that you'd like to ask. You're not going to answer that one. That sounds great, Philip. The students came up with I didn't fully catch that. Eggs in the background, yeah, I thought they conveyed the different emotions quite well, and it's shortly after Easter. So. Hello. Yeah.
You can talk about any issues around collaboration, how to encourage collaboration.
Yeah, I think there is the cultural aspect here, because I think if we're thinking in terms of future skills, both academically and work-wise, students are going to be working closely with people with different cultures. So I think a lot of that is about building understanding of different cultures and different ways of working, which again leads into some of the other future skills in terms of knowing kind of what ways to approach situations, not to react and how to react in certain situations. Does that answer?
I think that will help. Just looking through some of the other questions we've had. One was about emotional intelligence. Could you explain what it is?
Yeah, well, it's basically it's made up of those kind of sub skills that. So it's kind of all of these things. It's managing your own feelings, showing empathy to how others feel, motivation, and not just motivating, but being aware of what motivates you. So it could just be simple things like, especially if you're working from home, as a lot of us are at the moment, knowing what part of your day you're most productive, which is often different for different people. In terms of students, it can be, someone mentioned stimulation quickly, which is partly that, but it's also longer term. So looking at whether it's kind of instrumental motivation, are they studying English to perhaps take an exam or something, or is it intrinsic? Are they motivated purely because they enjoy studying? And it's helping students become self-aware of that, and of their feelings and how to empathize. And then the last part of that was people skills, so it's building rapport, and that's where the kind of social and cultural awareness comes into it as well.
Thank you, Ian. One question we've had is, how about assessing progress? I guess it's a challenge now, both assessing progress remotely, but also assessing progress with skills like this.
Well, in terms of skills, I think that the structure of roadmap, the main lessons, is set up to help assess it quite easy. In terms of there's partly in terms of the teacher, how they can assess and give feedback. So looking at common errors, things which what we call affordances, which are then opportunities for further learning. But also there's a lot of opportunities in roadmap for self-assessment, and that is very much linked to these communicative goals. So in the check and reflect lessons, at the very end, once they've done the review part, the goal of each lesson in that unit is set out, and students give themselves a score as to how confident they feel doing that skill at the moment. And if it's something they need to work on, then they're encouraged to look back at the specific language and skills which will help them become more confident in that.
Thank you. One question we've had is, do you enjoy working from home? Is it better than being in a classroom? I guess a comparison between the two.
That's a tough question. I like both, I think. I like aspects of working from home. I like some of the things that you can do online a lot more easily than you can face to face. Things like exploiting visuals a lot more, bringing out bits of like audio script, analysing bits of language. And I think there's a lot more scope for, someone mentioned very quickly there about emerging language. I think there's a lot more scope for picking up on that and recording it. Whereas with face-to-face teaching, I think it's nice as well. I think it is kind of easier to build a rapport because it's a bit more of a natural interaction, I think. So I like bits of both, really. I couldn't say I prefer one or the other.
Thank you very much. Just looking through the questions we've had as well. I guess one of the other questions, which is more about online classes, is how do you space out your own classes to prevent fatigue? I guess it's a case of your personal experience.
Oh God, I'd like to ask that question myself, actually. I tend to just take on the work that I get and then get very tired. I'm probably really not the best person to ask that about how to say no to work as it comes up. But I think one thing you do have to remember as well is that everything takes a bit longer when you're online teaching. So, for example, going to doing pair work. If you're face-to-face teaching, you work in pairs. If you're using Zoom, for example, you need to set up the breakout rooms, and then it often takes a few seconds to actually move there. And then you've got the normal kind of getting students going and then rounding them all up at the same time as well. So I think that's something that's worth remembering. Everything does take a bit longer with online teaching.
Thank you. And now returning to future skills, would you say that we should focus on future skills in every lesson, or focus on them in some of them?
I think whatever works for your students, really. I mean, if you're teaching a group of kind of, say, older learners who are there mainly intrinsically, then they'll probably just want to do stuff that's a bit more fun. But I think the kind of teaching the future, it's, oh, that's my dog just walked past in the kitchen. I think it's more of a kind of like background framework that these materials are built around. So I think it's not, if you, oh, there she goes again. If you're using something, something that you need to specifically plan out how to develop these skills yourself, because it's kind of done for you with the material. But it is something that you can kind of draw students' attention to and say, you know, this is something that's useful for the future. Thank you.